Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to this video. I want to quickly show you how to get a working Django website up and running with React as far as being able to transfer data back and forth from an API. So I'm going to start off real simple. I'm going to have one module. I'm going to turn it into a RESTful API so that I can use React to post and update and stuff like that. So first things first, I'm going to pull up my settings file here because it's just a blank Django project with nothing in it. I'm going to be creating an app called Post. In this Django app, I've actually never even run syncdb for the first time to even set up the super user and all that stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and run the first time syncdb. I'll go ahead and set up the super user now. Except I'm in the wrong directory. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to go through this process now and pause the video. So for security purposes, I can't really show that, but when you run syncdb for the first time in a Django project, it's going to go ahead and create all the authentication tables and stuff like that. And you create your super user, which I just did. So we're going to go ahead and run the first command to create our first app, which we're going to call post. I'm in the wrong directory again, god damn it. Alright, there we go. Now my development setup here is I'm using Windows and I have an Ubuntu Linux server that I'm communicating with, so I have to use a tool which is PuTTY, which is this command prompt screen that I'm using right now so I can work on the server. And then I'm using FileZilla to transfer files back and forth from my Windows environment up to my Linux server. So this is the two tools, PuTTY and FileZilla. And you can see on the server here on the right hand side, this is what's on the server and this is what's local. So you see the new app that we just created, Post, is there on the server, but it's not on the local. So I'm going to go ahead and download that and bring it in. And now I'll be able to access it inside my editor. And you can see the files that it creates automatically. So we'll start with our models file. I'm going to go ahead and define what the database table is going to look like, and that's what the Django models is for. And I already have this mapped out, so I'm going to just paste this here. And every post is going to have a title, a date, the article, and then the author. And the author is going to be an actual foreign key relationship to the user table, which is going to be created for you automatically when you run syncdb for the first time after creating your project. But when you're using the user object in this file, you need to go ahead and import it. So that's what we're doing up here at the top. And also, because I'm using this default date time, I want to go ahead and paste in the date time. However, with Django 1.8, actually newer versions, I'm not sure how far back it goes, but there's an alternative method of doing this where old school was datetime.datetime.now. You don't have to do that anymore. So there's two options here. The old school version is to do what I'm showing you here, or you can just paste this in and then we can remove datetime since we're not using it. That's probably the preferred method now. Now we're going to look at the admin file which was created for us. And a few things I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to paste in this code and I'll explain it. Is anytime you log into your admin in Django, you'll be able to see all the different posts and everything, and here's the way it's going to display. It's going to display it by title, and if you remember from the models that we have our title defined here, and every post title is going to be unique. And then we're also given the ability to be able to search by title. Now because we're referencing post here, we need to go ahead and import the post object that we just created in our models file. So to do that, we'll do the import statement here. Now we're going to go ahead and create an additional Python file which is going to be called urls.py. Alright, and a few things that we're going to do. I'll go ahead and paste in all this stuff here I'm going to show you here. So we're going to say from Django config.urls we're importing everything. We're going to be using Django REST framework to do our RESTful API, and from there we want to import format suffix patterns, and that's going to allow us to be able to put .json, .xml, and get that format based on whatever sort of extension that we put in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just define my views to look like this, where you'll be able to access a view the regular Django way by passing in the post ID, and I'll explain more on that later, but we'll query by that post ID to get the right post. And then this is the API specific stuff where we can actually use the API to just get back a particular post, and then this will display all the posts. And then finally down here, this is actually implementing what we imported, the format suffix pattern. So that will all make more sense as we go along, but you just want to go ahead and type all this code in. Now, since we're using Django REST framework, we need to go ahead and install that. So I'm going to say pip install Django REST framework. I think that might not be. So it's actually all one word with no hyphens. Alright, now in order to be able to use REST framework in your project, we need to go to our settings file of our project, and in the installed apps we're going to be adding that down here. Alright, so in our views we're going to go ahead and implement the view for this first normal Django way of our post, and this is the same way that they described in the poll module that the Django documentation provides. So we'll go ahead and paste this in, and then I'll be returning this. There's something here that I need to get rid of. Now, what I'm going to do here is I want the Django way to render as little as possible. So when the page is requested, the template's going to be rendered, and the only thing that's going to be passed to that template is the actual ID of the post. So instead of querying the database here and getting the result back and sending it to the view and all that stuff, I'm actually going to load the template first so it appears as if it's loading quickly, so it's a good user experience. And then from the template, React is going to go ahead and grab this post ID and then make an AJAX call to actually query the database via the API to load that post information and populate the template that way. Now let's go ahead and work on this post list view that we have described here in our URLs. And this is going to be the more complicated of the two. So we're going to start with creating a class. And this is a class-based view, which is all described in the documentation for Django REST framework. And we're going to go ahead and inside this list, we're going to implement the get view. Probably add a space here. All right, and now we're going to be, this is where we actually query the database. And we're going to order by the date, and we want to make sure this order by and then negative date is actually going to grab the newest object first, and that's the way I want it to be listed. Now we're also referencing something that doesn't exist, which is our post serializer, and with Django REST framework, in order to serialize to and from Django objects that correspond to your database tables, you need to have a serializer so it can serialize that information to and from XML, JSON, etc. And that's what's going to be going on here, and we'll describe that in just a moment. We're also getting some import errors, so a lot of this stuff is going to be imported in just a second so that we don't have missing imports. Now that defines all GET requests, and GET requests is not going to have any sort of authentication or anything required. I want it to be read only. Allow anybody, whether they're authenticated or not, to be able to request these post objects so they can read them. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and define our post method, and post method is going to be a lot more strict. And what we're going to do is we're going to use something called permission classes. Once again, this is going to have to be imported, but this is a out-of-the-box Django REST framework where it is admin user, and that's going to be your super user, or anybody that has that super user status will be able to post new posts to your API. Now, when somebody does post to the API, I don't want to rely on the client-side code to pass in the authenticated user via the AJAX call, because then somebody that can read that AJAX call can clearly see that the user ID is being passed to the view, and the view is then doing something with that. So I don't even bother allowing that information to be passed across the wire. So I want to go ahead and use that inside. I want to get that data after the post request is made. So I'll do that by saying user equals request.user, which I can get on this post here. And the request object is here, so the user is part of that. Now, as far as the serializer is concerned, once again, the serializer doesn't exist, but the same serializer that was referenced before is also going to be referenced here, except this time we're going to be passing in a context object to that, and we're going to be passing in the user that we requested from server side, which is a lot more, like I said, I think it's a lot more safe to do it that way than trying to get the client to pass that through the Django template or whatever. Finally, we say if serializer is valid, and we're serializer.save, and then we'll return a response of 201 created, or if something goes wrong, they'll get a 400 bat request response. Now, to shore up all these import problems, we're going to do that in just a moment after we implement the get class, or the post detail class. This is the final view of our URLs down here, so we're going to be implementing this method, this post detail, as a view. So go ahead and add that down here. And then all this is simply doing is just getting the one particular object that was requested, and it does that through this number here. So it will call the serializer for whether it's post 1, 2, or 3 or whatever. And most likely this will all start making sense as soon as we start seeing it in action. Alright, so let's go ahead and import some of these things that we're missing here. So first we have these permission classes, so I want to go ahead and import that. So from REST Framework decorators, import permission classes. So let's go ahead and say from REST Framework permission, since we're using that is super user, which is down, or is admin user, I'm sorry. That's going to be imported from here. So from REST Framework permissions, import is admin user. And we're missing the response object. And this is a specific Django REST Framework object that we need. So from REST Framework.response, import response. That'll fix that. We need our post object from our post table that we had created in our models file. So let's go ahead and import that. We're referencing the built-in status from REST Framework, so let's go ahead and import from REST Framework, import status. And then while we're at it, we also need to import generics, which is what we're using down there. And then finally, the only other import that we're missing is the post serializer. So let's go ahead and create that now. So we're going to create a new Python file, and we'll call it post serializer. Get rid of all that. Actually, you know what? I don't want to call it that. I want to rename it. This is, since it's already in the post module, so we don't. It's really redundant to say post serializer. Just call it serializer. In fact, you should probably do serializer is probably the more standard way of saying it. Alright, so in this file, let's go ahead and start by saying from REST Framework import serializers. And then we're also going to need to reference our post object like we've been doing elsewhere. So we'll import from our models, import the post. We also need the user. Well, actually, we may not need the user. Yeah, we probably won't need the user. Let's go ahead and create our Serializer class. So we'll define that down here. And now, since this is a model serializer, there's a shortcut in Django REST Framework to say just class meta, and then you define a model. So we'll say model equals post. And then specifically on the post, I want to go ahead and say all the objects that I do want serialized. Now, by default, ID does not get serialized, but that's always helpful when I'm getting JSON object back from the database. I want to know what the ID is of that, so that's why I specify here. Now, what fields is doing is a tuple in Python, and that's saying specifically if there were more fields in this to the class object of post, they're not going to be included, only what's in this tuple. So specifically I'm saying these are the items that I want returned. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and define our create method. So anytime a new object, new post is created, this method is called, so we're overriding it. And we're using this information up at the top. Now, one of the things that we're using, that user object, remember the context object that we sent to our serializer? Well, it's being used here. So we're grabbing the user from the context. And then when we actually create the object to the database, you can see that we're using the user here. So we never pass that information. The server, everything server side said, hey, this is the authenticated user that's currently logged in, and it didn't matter what data was sent for that user. It was going to be the information that exists within the session. Alright, so that's really all the back-end work that we need to do for this new module. Now we need to go back over to our command line. And let me see. We need to go ahead and run our make migrations command. I'm using Django 1.8. Probably should have said that at the beginning of the video. But make migrations is effective, I think, as of Django 1.7. Otherwise, you have to use the old school way of South. And if you're starting a new project, there's definitely no reason not to use Django 1.8 or at least 1.7. Alright, so I'm going to say Python manage.py and then make migrations. And this is going to automatically detect. Now, one of the things I forgot to do is I actually need to upload all this crap, so that way I can actually see it. Because we need to upload our my project, which is the main application name that I have for this, and then the post module. Because remember, my project contains a settings file which says, hey, there's a new application that's being used, not only post for the app that we just created, but also Django REST Framework. So now when we run make migrations, you can see that it detected the post object from the settings file, and it went ahead and created the initial database schema. And now that it's created, we need to go ahead and say migrate. And now it went ahead and changed that. So migrations are a total pain in the butt. And Django South and all that stuff never, I mean, it was great, but it constantly didn't work. And it was a real big headache. Anytime you change your database table, a lot of people would resort to like dropping the entire table and trying to have to repopulate stuff. It was just, it was always a nightmare basically. So it did work for me, and it took a long time to learn it, but I mean, it was very, very difficult for newbies, and this is a much better thing that Django has for newbies to run, make migrations and then migrate, and it just works out of the box. So now that works, let's go ahead and go back to the project. We're going to go to the main settings project here. I want to go into the URLs, and I didn't even realize, but this is actually set up out of the box. See, I'm an old school Django user going back like 5 years now. So before, you used to have to enable the admin. So if this thing works out of the box, let's go ahead and check this out. Alright, so it works. Alright, so if you ever run into this situation where you have this ugly font and everything, you can see the CSS files aren't being used. So you need to go back over to your command prompt, and you have to run a command which is Python, and then go back to your manage.py file, and you're going to run collect static. Don't have a static root. Alright, I have to update the static root in the settings file. Yeah, I definitely don't have it defined in here, so this is a brand new project, so I need to go ahead and add that. And this is just a just a regular file path to where your application can be found on your Linux server. And mine is located here, so I say post and static. Put everything in a static folder. Alright, so if I go ahead and update this, this should have the collect static should be able to work now. Because what it's saying is that it needs to know where the static folder is, because it's going to put the CSS folders in here. It should be like an admin folder. We'll check that in just a moment. So if I run this command again, just go ahead and say yes. Damn it. Go ahead and say yes. Alright, so I went ahead and copied a bunch of stuff over, and if we look at this server and we refresh this, sorry, my server's going slow here. Actually, you know what? The static files for this particular Django admin is actually it's pointing to the virtual environment, so never mind. But either way, it copied it over, and it works now. Alright. So now if I log into the website, because we added posts to the admin, you can see that we now have this post, and we can create new posts and stuff like that, and that the author is linked to, it's a foreign key relationship, like I said, to the user table, which currently only has one registered user. Alright, so that is all working as expected. Now, in order to be able to use the URLs file of our post application that we just created, or the post app, we need to go to the URLs of our main project, and underneath the admin, go ahead and add. This is something that I have for another project, but we're going to say poll, and then we're using poll.urls. I'm going to upload that, make sure it works. Yeah, obviously I have a typo there. It's post. I don't even know what I'm thinking about. Alright, post serializer. Oh yeah, we didn't actually import our serializer into the views, so that's one typo. Let's go ahead and fix that now. And we'll just say from serializers import post. Alright. So this should say from serializers. Alright, so now it's working just fine with our new object. And let's go ahead and test out this API just to see how everything's going. We'll say this is our first post. Test post. This is a great tutorial. Assign me, and then I'll go ahead and save this. Now, if I pull up another URL, I want to go to new post. And if we go to post and then API and then 1, you'll see that it pulls up the Django REST framework, and it tells me what what's available to me, so I can do a get, a put, a patch, and all this other stuff, which is really a problem. I really don't want that, but I'll worry about that later, because I certainly don't want. Yeah, I'll worry about that later. Anyway, so the format suffix patterns that I was explaining at the beginning of the video when we imported that into our URLs, where that comes into handy is actually right here. So if I do after the / and I say .json, you can see that it's going to actually give the .json format, and that's the purpose of that. Because most of the time you're going to make a request with this exact same format here, even with the /. You can have the / removed, but I just keep it there and I just make the request just like this without having to edit anything. So in my AJAX call, this is the URL that I'm requesting specifically, and it's going to come back with this data as a JSON object that I can say data.id, data.author, blah blah blah. Alright, so now in order to implement React into our project, let's go ahead and download that. I also want to download Bootstrap. And we'll grab the starter kit. It'll give you a zipped up file. I actually don't want all of it. I just want the minimized version and then the JSX transpiler. So we're going to do the min. I'll extract that. And let's see. Alright, so I'll go into my build.js folder. Okay. And then I want the JS transformer. Alright, so both of those should be there now. Now we also need to go ahead and create a template. Alright, so we also need the Bootstrap file, so I'm going to extract that to the same location. And then while we're at it, we're also going to use the minimum CSS. And then we're going to extract the entire font to the static. Actually go into the build folder. So now if I look at this and go into the build, so we now have the fonts, CSS, no images yet, JavaScript, so Bootstrap min, React min. Alright, so let's go ahead and create, I'm going to create just a regular HTML template. We're going to call this, in fact actually I'm going to create a folder called master page, a directory called master pages. And then in here I'll just create an HTML file. I'll just call this let's call this main master page. No, you know what, that's stupid. I'll just call this main. So I have a template already built here, and at the bottom of my template, this is just a regular Django template. So I have the references to where React, the minimum version of React can be found, the JSX transpiler, also this common JS file, which is something I'm going to need for this template that I'm working with. I also reference the Bootstrap min file, and then there's also the jQuery, which is I'm using the repository that Google provides, the cache network that they have to deliver the jQuery file quickly. And then finally, because I'm going to be using Google Ads in my project and using React to render those Google Ads, I actually have to add the script file, but you can disregard this part at the end. It's really not necessary. The template here is going to have my disclaimer for the company that I own, also references to sitemap, about us, contact us, all the stuff that doesn't exist for the project yet. Some social network contacts and stuff like that. Now this bit of information is that I want the navigation to be dynamic, that if the user is not authenticated, that there's going to be a login/register link. If they are logged in, it's just going to go ahead and it's going to have a profile drop down where they can log in. I'm sorry, not log in. So if they're not logged in, it'll display these two links where they can log in or register. Otherwise, it'll display a logout button and or ability to view their profile, which none of that exists yet, but that's what's going on here. Up at the top, you can see the actual text will be a login register if they're not logged in, and then profile if they are logged in. You'll see that in action here in just a moment. So a lot of this stuff you don't have to actually worry about. This is all just part of my setup for this specific site. I actually need to update some of these paths because this is going to be in the build folder. All right, a couple of things to point out with the template in case you're interested, that I have these different blocks that all pages that are going to inherit from this, they're going to be able to specify their own meta content. In fact, most of this is probably going to be moved into the page that inherits from this, because none of this should really be here. This should be on the page that implements it. And then there's a block CSS, so you can add custom CSS to the file, and then down here is the content, the main content of the page, and then at the bottom there's also the ability to put footer scripts. So those are basically the three things that any page should be able to implement in order to have an effective master page. Alright, so now when you look at the views and you see that this post.html, this is going to look right inside your templates folder, and right now there is no post.html, so let's go ahead and create that. Now first things first, since we're going to be using a master page, we need to go ahead and do an extends command, and then this is where we say master pages, and then we just called it main.html. Our second command is going to be to load static files. And finally we have a block title, which we're not going to put anything for right now. Now let's go ahead and add the block content command, or content section. Alright, so there's quite a bit to upload to the server, but we're going to upload all this information that we just put inside the static. I don't think I changed anything on the post or to my project. I don't remember if I did or not, but let's go ahead and do this here. So if we go to post and then say 1, alright, so the template doesn't exist yet, it doesn't find it. Alright, so in Django 1.8, it looks like they overhauled the entire template system in order to be able to support multiple templating applications like Jinja 2 and things like that. So it is actually something that's new to me, but normally you would, or in the old school way, you would do the template directories here, and we need to actually take this value, and I'll remove this, and we would put that inside of our directory here. Also, based on the documentation under the context processor, I should go ahead and put all of this here. And this is just going based off of the Django 1.8 documentation, specifically stating that if I haven't customized it, which I haven't, that I should just put those in there, which I did. And I guess that should be the default if it's telling us we should do that. Let me see if this has any different result. Alright guys, so with the new Django 1.8 setup, your template should look like this. And all this is really the default, but the directory here is where it would differentiate depending on your specific setup here. So all this other stuff is just recommended by Django 1.8. So if we request a page, you can see that it is loading and everything. Alright, so we have some craziness going on with the view, but if you look at the view source, you can see that it's inheriting from all the master page and everything that we had just created. So all that data is there. Nothing's showing up yet. One of the things I have screwing up my view here is this loader from a template that I was borrowing from another site. Alright, so here's the main part of the application. It's still missing quite a bit, but there's the part that I was telling you about where it shows profile since the user is logged in. I don't have a logo image, missing all the images and everything down here too. None of that is a big deal to me at the moment. Since I'm using Bootstrap, I'm going to go ahead and go and edit this post. Everything should be inside some sort of div container, so we'll say div class equals container, and with Bootstrap that class actually centers the content in the middle. So I also have to add another script tag. I'm going to be providing all this code on GitHub, so if you guys are following along and can't really keep up with the changes that are being made, I'm going to provide all this template and everything else so you guys can just copy and paste it. Alright, so you can see that the drop downs and everything are working now that I added those script tags that I need. Still missing the logo, but I'm not really concerned about that. We're also missing some of these images, but we're not going to worry about that for right now. But you can see that the actual tag that we had added to the page that inherits the master page, which includes all this stuff, is now being displayed the way we want it to. So this is going to be a two-part video. In the next video, we're actually going to go ahead and implement the React and do the communication with the server for adding posts and things like that. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Bye.